what, in your opinion, was the origin of the virus?
This has been studied by the WHO.
Ma'am, I'm asking your opinion.
I don't believe I've seen enough data, individual data, for me to be able to comment on that.
What are the possibilities?
Certainly the possibilities of that most coronaviruses that we know of are of origin from, that have infected the population, SARS-CoV-1, MERS, generally come from an animal origin. And
Are there any other possibilities?
certainly a lab-based origin is one possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's the head of the CDC right there. So yesterday we kicked off the show talking about the lab leak theory, and we made 4 points. First, more and more scientists are saying that this is a possibility and need to be investigated. We talked about a State Department memo that was sent in 2018 from Beijing saying, hey, this lab is not safe. We talked about following the money and following the power. Those were our 4 points, and you can find that on yesterday's show. But as we were talking about, I was just having all these flashbacks to how you were called an absolute idiot if you ever even suggested that maybe this leaked out from the, I don't know, biosafety level 4 lab that does coronavirus gain of function experiments on bats in Wuhan. Crazy concept. Drew Holden is here. He's a freelancer, and you've seen him in National Review and Federalist and all these other places. Drew, how are you, brother?
Mike, I'm doing well, sir. I'm relieved that this story has finally, I think, had the cover blown off of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's really interesting psychology as to why it has taken so long. But let's go back in time first. You did a wonderful thread as to how these conspiracy theorists were treated by the media. What do you remember the most?
Sure. So, I think what really jumps out to me was there was a piece in the Washington Post back in January of 2020. So before there's even a pandemic, before this really goes the way that obviously the last 14, 15 months have gone, where Tom Cotton had suggested that there was a possibility, certainly not a certainty, but a possibility that the coronavirus that we were seeing in China could have leaked from this level 4 biosafety lab that exists right down the street in Wuhan. And the Washington Post said that merely suggesting that that was a possibility was fanning the embers of a conspiracy theory that had been repeatedly debunked by experts. And I remember I reread those words the other day after, obviously, a lot of the narrative has changed. We've seen a lot of experts come out and say, hey, we need a lot more information about this. Even the World Health Organization saying, hey, we need China to put their cards on the table on these sorts of things. And I reread those words and I thought, my goodness, that aged poorly.
Wow, amazing. I love the repeatedly debunked by experts.
Yep.
And this was when?
This was in January of 2020. So this was,
it didn't even have time to be debunked.
Exactly. But the great thing too was it wasn't the last time that this would happen, right? NPR in April said the same thing, that Cotton and Trump and Pompeo had floated these ideas that had been debunked, had been dismissed. And it's insane to me, right, to think that even if there wasn't enough evidence, right? There are some people who had said that back then, fine, fair. But to go all the way to say that it was a conspiracy theory or that it had been debunked, it is inconceivable to me that one could look at the absence of evidence we had back then and draw a strong conclusion like that. And yet everyone managed to do it.
Amazing. Real quick, and we talked about this in greater detail in yesterday's show. One of the great debunkings was in a letter in The Lancet, which is a medical journal, that was written by this guy, Dr. Deszek, D-E-S-Z-E-K or something like that, who's the head of EcoHealth Alliance, who was given $3.7 million by the National Institute of Health, and then gave $600,000 to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He had a very strong incentive to make it clear that it did not come from a lab that he funded for bat coronavirus research. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's entirely accurate. And it's not just even in the specific and the narrow of his own personal reputation or anything like that. I mean, one of the other big concerns in all of this is that he has to, in many respects, be responsive to the needs of the Chinese Communist Party. If he is doing research there, these are the people who are responsible for giving him the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And so the fact that he's got to have all of these considerations in the back of his head is another thing that, for whatever reason, we haven't found a way to talk about over the last year.
What do you make of the fact that these reporters, journalists, were why were they so knee-jerk? I mean, was it just pure politics? Was it pure Trump, pure anti, because they hate, obviously, Tom Cotton?
Yeah.
Is that all that motivated this?
I don't think so. So I think that was a huge driving force. I think the insistence that if Trump says something that we cannot neatly fit into existing evidence, it has to be wrong, was a huge driver of this. But I think the other knee-jerk reaction is that there's a little bit of a defensive crouch, I think, in all of these posts, these commentaries, these write-ups about what happened, because there is I think a unwillingness from a lot of journalists and a lot of outlets to really take on China in a good and meaningful way. And they get, I think they get a little bit hung up when it comes to saying things that could reflect poorly on China. One, access issues, I'm sure, come to mind. But two, all of this is mixed up in anti-Asian bias and violence against Asian Americans and all these other conversations. So I think the hesitancy to call balls and strikes on anything that touches China was also a really big driver of this.
Wow, so it's like woke. That's why Nancy Pelosi said, come on out to Chinatown. It's great. Come
Exactly.
on, everyone. The health department in New York City is like, come to the parade, Chinese New Year. It's wonderful.
Bingo.
I remember Italy had Hug a Chinese Day. Hug a Chinese Day, Drew.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
Hug a Chinese Day.
Yes, right. And I think one of the other reasons that it's so absurd, there's a letter from, I think it was 14 or 18 leading virologists in Science magazine recently where they came out and said, and one of their big points was, listen, just being critical of research being done in China is not racist. It's absurd to call it racist. And that if we actually want to combat things like bias and concerns and everything else, then what we need to do is use the same measuring stick everywhere. And if we're not willing to do that, we're not going to get the answers that we need.
Wow. That was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.